I spoke to Mrs. Smarty Pants today. Written by the Bronywriter. Twilight Sparkle lifted a basket full of apples off her back and plopped them down onto the floor of Applejack's barn. She stretched and cracked her neck to get a little feeling back in them before turning to Applejack, who was depositing apple baskets of her own. She pushed her Stetson up and wiped a layer of sweat off her brow. "Thank you kindly for helping me out today, Twilight." Twilight grinned at her friend. "No problem at all, Applejack. You know I'm always glad to help." "I just don't know where Big Macintosh couldn't gone off to." Applejack's eyes narrowed, and she glanced out in the direction of the schoolhouse. "He better not be hanging out with that school teacher again." Twilight chuckled and put her hoof on Applejack's shoulder. "I'm sure he's fine. There's a reasonable explanation. I'm sure of it." "He didn't say what his plans were when y'all came by and saw him today?" Twilight shook her head. "You know him. He doesn't really say much anyway." Twilight smiled and rubbed Applejack's shoulder. "I'm sure he's okay." Applejack sighed and nodded. "Yeah, I know you're right, Twi. I'll go out looking for him if he ain't home in an hour." "Speaking of that, I best be heading off," said Twilight. She motioned the door of the barn. "It's getting pretty dark, and you know Spike. He's going to get in some kind of trouble if I'm not there to make sure he gets on to bed in time." Applejack snorted. "Yeah, you're right." Applejack threw her foreleg over Twilight's shoulder and pulled her for a hug. "Thanks, y'all, for helping me out. I real appreciate it." "Anytime, AJ, anytime." Twilight took an apple out of one of the baskets and trotted out of the barn, munching on the apple as she did. The sun had already set, and the moon was just beginning to creep over the horizon, illuminating Twilight's path back to her home. She finished the last bite of her apple, just as the silhouette of her house appeared in the distance. She smiled to herself, and began humming the song that Pinkie Pie had sung a few weeks back, about how she loved it when Pony smiled. She reached the front door, just as the moon reached its peak into the sky. With a burst of her horn, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. "Spike, I'm home. Sorry I'm late. Applejack and I were harvesting her apples, and it took a little longer than we thought." Twilight closed the door behind her, and was immediately plunged into total darkness. Not even the moonbeam shone through the curtains. "Spike?" she called again. "Spike? Are you here?" Twilight frowned and illuminated her horn. It was quite unlike Spike to be in bed this early, and even more unlike him to go to bed when she had not returned home. Usually she returned home to find him raiding the fridge, or playing some kind of game with Pee-wee. She frowned and moved into the direction of her bed. "Maybe Spike went out gem hunting with Rarity, and it tired him out," she mumbled. Twilight trotted up the stairs and walked up to Spike's basket. She lifted his blanket up. Nothing. She turned around and scanned the dark main floor of the library. "Spike? Spike, this isn't funny!" She was only met with silence. She growled and walked back down the stairs. "Where is that silly dragon?" Twilight walked over to her desk and brightened her horn a little more. The light fell into a small, magically powered lamp, and she emanated a ball of light from her horn into the lamp. The light stopped in the center of the lamp, and Twilight twisted it into a knob until the light shone brighter. "Okay, Spike, if you're hiding somewhere to scare me, I'm coming to find you," she called out. "This is getting old."
"Oh, Twilight, Spike isn't here anymore,"
giggled a disembodied voice that echoed throughout the library. Twilight gasped and nearly knocked over the lamp she was spun around. "Who are you? Where are you?" The voice giggled again.
"Why, Twilight, don't you remember your oldest friend?"
Twilight growled and lifted the lamp into the air, moving it around to light up in different parts of the library. "I never met you before in my life! Is this some kind of prank some pony's pulling?" Twilight moved the lamp so that it was shining on a bookshelf closest to the door. "Pinkie Pie? Are you and Rainbow Dash pulling some kind of prank again? You know I don't like it when you do that."
"Guess again." no ponies here but you and me, Twilight.
Twilight took a few steps towards the center of the room. The voice had been coming from somewhere close, but it seemed to be coming from all around her at the same time. It reminded her somehow of a gleeful old lady with a high-pitched voice. It didn't sound like any pony from Ponyville, and it was unlikely to be some pony from Canterlot. "I'm getting tired of this game!" Twilight snapped. "Either tell me who you are, or I'm calling my friends here so we can deal with you."
Oh, Twilight, I'm the only friend that you will ever need. It pains me to hear that you say you don't like games. You used to love them back when it was just you and me.
"Show yourself!" Twilight snarled.
Well, if you insist. I'm on the table, just a few hoops away from you.
Twilight narrowed her eyes and adjusted her magical grip on the lamp. She took a few steps forward, but stopped when she felt something wet underneath her hooves. Frowning, Twilight lifted up her left foreleg and moved the lamp down to examine her hoof. What she saw made her squeal in fear, and she nearly dropped the lamp. The underside of her hoof was lined with a wet coat of deep crimson blood. It was fresh. To complete the picture, a dark brown feather was stuck on the bottom of her hoof. Twilight let out a shriek and took a few steps backwards. What did you do to Owlicious?"
Well, let's see. You just stepped in a mess of his feathers and blood. I think it's safe to assume that he isn't out having tea with Fluttershy.
The voice began cackling. The cawing laugh echoed throughout the library, causing Twilight to step back a few more paces and flatten her ears. "Please stop," she whimpered. "Whoever you are, just leave!"
But Twilight, I thought we were best friends.
Twilight bit her lip and began walking towards the table again. Each step brought forth more wetness underneath her hooves. "It could just be ketchup. This is all some prank. I'm sure of it." She reached the edge of the table and slowly raised her lamp into the air. The small beam of light that bathed the table in an eerie glow, and everything on the table casted a long shadow. "Where are you?" Twilight squeaked. I can't see you!"
I'm right here, Twilight. Surely you can see what is right in front of you. You are quite the observant mare, after all.
Twilight squinted and leaned in for a closer look at the table. "I can't see you. If you..." Her eyes landed on that one object on her table that was out of place. The one object that he didn't really remember putting there before. She let out a small gasp and snapped her head back. "Smarty Pants?"
Bingo! You are just as smart as I remember, Twilight.
"No," Twilight whispered. "No, it isn't possible. Big Macintosh has you. I even told him that he can keep you."
Yes, that was something that you did, wasn't it? I don't appreciate being abandoned by you, Twilight. I am yours, and you are mine. That has been the way it works since we met.
Twilight pulled the lamp back, draping darkness over the table once again. "No! This isn't possible! You're with Big Macintosh! You're just a doll! You can't move anywhere!"
Oh, Twilight, don't you see? A toy as loved as I am always finds its way back to its owner. Always.
"No! You're not alive!" Twilight lowered the lamp closer to the floor, revealing the full extent of the bloody carnage. Feathers drenched in blood littered the floor. Twilight's hoofprints were clearly visible in the carnage. To complete the picture, a small crumpled mass was lying still in the corner nearest Twilight. She wailed in fear and backed away. "What did you do to my owl?"
Twilight, that's not the silly little owl. I'm not sure where he is. Let's just leave it at this. You and I are the only living creatures in his whole library.
"You're not alive!" Twilight screamed. "You're just a doll!" Twilight raised the lamp and poured more magic into it, to light up the room even more. "I know you're just some sicko pretending to be Smarty Pants. Get out here so I can tear you apart."
Twilight, I already told you that I'm on the table. It's me, Smarty Pants. I'm your best friend.
"I don't know why you stole Smarty Pants from Big Macintosh, but he's going to scour the planet for you."
Twilight, Twilight, Twilight. If you think that moronic stallion is any more alive than your little pets, think again. I wouldn't have been able to get here otherwise.
Tears began welling up in Twilight's eye, and she began backing away from the table. I'm going to get the princess now, she said, through her sobs. We're going to burn you to ash.
I'm sorry, Twilight. I'm afraid I can't let you do that.
Twilight jumped into the air with a yelp, dropping the lamp as she did. It shattered onto the ground, forcing the treehouse into darkness once more. No! She wailed. Go away!
I told you, Twilight. Toys like me always find a way back to those who love them the most. Remember when I was your only friend?
When she spoke next, Twilight heard her over her left shoulder.
All those nights spent studying and doing our homework. We would sneak into the library after dark and read all the books that we wanted to until sunrise. Don't you miss that? You didn't have to abandon me for your Ponyville friends. How could you do that to me?
Twilight reeled around and shot another beam of magic towards the noise. It collided with the bookshelf and blew the entire section away, scattering the remains all over the room.
You're going to have to do better than that, Twilight. Maybe you don't have it in you to hurt your best friend.
Twilight turned tail and ran towards the front door.
If I can't hurt her, I need to escape.
She fired up her horn, and her magical aura encased the doorknob. She pulled it to open the door, but the knob popped right off. With a groan of frustration, Twilight ignited her horn to shed some light in the room and ran towards the door. She slammed her whole body weight on it, but it didn't budge an inch. She spun around and glared at the darkness. Open the door, Smarty Pants! She yelled.
Not until you and I have a talk, Twilight.
Twilight fired up her horn to teleport out of the house.
Gonna go to Applejack. She'll know what to do.
Come now, Twilight. You can't get out that easily. We have some serious catching up to do. Why, I hardly know anything about you since I was locked in a trunk for 5 years.
Shut up! Twilight snarled. She bolted in the direction of the stairs, running towards her balcony window. As she reached for it, she saw another spell at the window. It bounced right off the glass, ricocheting right back towards her. She threw herself at the ground, and the spell whizzed past her head, hitting another bookcase and sending the books flying. This isn't possible, she whispered. A doll can't do this. Twilight felt a small pressure on her back, a pressure that reminded her of the times that she had let Smarty Pants ride there when she was carrying her around.
Twilight, back here.
Twilight yelped and leaped into the air, but the pressure of Smarty Pants on her back was still there. Twilight ran towards the curtains covering the balcony window and grabbed them in her teeth. She yanked them back as hard as she could, but they didn't move in the slightest. She lost her grip on them, and a force of her momentum knocked her off balance. She tumbled backwards, narrowly managing to avoid falling down the stairs.
There's no getting out of our talk, Twilight. I just want to sit down and talk like the friends we are.
You're not my friend, Twilight screeched. Get out of my house! Twilight began bucking up and down in an attempt to throw Smarty Pants off of her, but the doll stayed fixed on her back as if it was glued there. She ran over to the nearest corner and rubbed her back on it in an attempt to scrape Smarty Pants off, but it was no use.
Twilight, I must ask that you stop this nonsense at once. It's like I said, I just want to talk. I did what I did to your pet so we could be alone, just like the old days when you were a filly.
Stop it! Get away from me!
Let's go into the kitchen and we can have a midnight snack, and read just like we used to. Don't you love me anymore?
No, I don't! Twilight screamed as she began bucking again. Let me out of here! Get off of me! Smarty Pants giggled, and Twilight felt the stuffed hoof patter on her head.
Twilight, don't you at least want to try hanging out again? Who knows, you could really like it. A tea party could jog your memory about the old days.
No! Go away and leave me alone! Smarty Pants groaned, and Twilight felt her crawl onto her head.
Twilight, if you don't stop bucking around, I'm afraid I'm going to have to take drastic measures to make sure you and I hang out tonight.
Stop! Go away and let me out of here! Twilight bolted towards the door and slammed her body into it. Unlock the door, Smarty Pants!
Twilight, I'm going to count to 3. If you don't stop screaming like a fool at nap time, I'm going to have to make sure you quiet down.
Just leave me alone! Twilight sobbed. I want to get out of here!
1.
Twilight's sobs became louder. She continued slamming her body onto the door. Just leave me alone!
2.
Please just leave me alone, Smarty Pants, Twilight begged. I don't want to be your friend.
3.
A few days later, Rarity hummed an upbeat day to herself as she trotted over to Twilight's library home. She had not seen her friend, nor her dragon assistant for almost 3 days now, but it had happened that she got so focused with studying for some big test that she forgot to get some sunshine every now and then. She reached the door and rapped on it 3 times. Twilight, darling, are you there? It's Rarity. Rarity perked her ears up and leaned in closer to the door. The library was silent for a few seconds before Rarity heard movement from inside the treehouse. She smiled to herself and straightened her back up, just in time for Twilight to open the door. She smiled when she saw Rarity, and opened the door a little more. Hey Rarity, what brings you here? Rarity returned Twilight's smile. Her friend looked very well groomed and rested, so she clearly was taking care of herself. Yes, this was likely just a studying binge. Good afternoon, Twilight. I was wondering if Spike was around. You see, I'm in some desperate need for some rubies, and I need his help. Twilight shook her head, her grin never leaving her lips. I'm sorry, Rarity. He's not around anymore. Rarity frowned and cocked her head. Any more? Twilight shook her head again, with a little more force. Nope. I'm having a tea party with Smarty Pants right now. Would you like to join? Twilight leaned in, and her voice took on to a conspiratorial tone. We're making brownies. Then, we're going to do our homework together. Rarity flattened her ears and took a step backwards. Twilight? Did you say Smarty Pants? I did, Rarity, Twilight chirped. I really did, didn't I? She and I have been reconnecting for the past few days, now that meanie Big Macintosh doesn't have her anymore. In fact, Twilight's head perked up, and she swiveled her ears in the direction of the kitchen. Did you say something? Silence was her only reply, but Twilight nodded as if some pony responded. Okay, I'll tell her. Twilight turned her attention back to Rarity. I'm sorry, Rarity. Smarty Pants wanted just to be us this time. I'm sure you'll understand. Maybe we can get together sometime next week, okay? Rarity slowly reached out a hoof and touched Twilight's shoulder. Twilight, The instant Rarity's hoof made contact, Twilight flinched back and an almost primitive snarl emanated from her throat. Rarity snapped her hoof back and flinched away. Twilight stared intently at Rarity for a few seconds before her wide smile returned. I'm sure we can set up some time later. Smarty Pants says that next week may not work, but we'll figure something out. Twilight, please talk to me, Rarity pleaded. What do you mean by this Smarty Pants business? Twilight shrugged and began slowly closing the door. I told you, Rarity, Smarty Pants and I are catching up. We have a lot more to do, so if I can get back to that. Rarity shot her hoof forwards and blocked the door. Twilight, where is Spike? Twilight giggled and continued closing the door. I told you, he's not here anymore. It's just me and Smarty Pants. Twilight, stop it with the Smarty Pants nonsense at once! Twilight continued closing the door, slowly crushing Rarity's hoof as she did. Twilight, you're hurting me! It's not nonsense, Rarity, Twilight insisted. It's just us catching up. Now if you'll excuse me, please. Rarity ignited her horn and forced the door to open a little more. Twilight, please let me in so I could talk to you! Twilight pushed back on the door, just as Rarity poked her head inside. The door pressed against her neck, but Rarity was able to scan the inside of the library. The first thing that caught her eye was a glint of red staining the floor. She shrieked when she realized what it was. "Twilight? Why is there blood on the floor?" "Rarity, Smarty Pants says she just wants us to be together today," Twilight snarled. "I'll talk to you later." At the word later, Twilight slammed her body onto the door, smashing the edge against the side of Rarity's head. Rarity groaned in pain, but forced herself to look around the room for the source of the blood. Bloody feathers were scattered around the floor, and Rarity saw what could only be Twilight's hoofprints in the blood. Finally, her eyes locked into a crumpled mess in the corner. She inhaled sharply when she saw who it was. "Spiky Wikey!" she screamed. Spike lay unmoving in the corner. His head was twisted nearly backwards, revealing a long, jagged gash at his throat. His eyes were glazed over, and his mouth was twisted in a silent scream. In his claws were the plucked remains of Twilight's owl, and a pile of ash that can only have been Pee-wee lay beside him. A burst of magic shot forth from Twilight's horn, knocking Rarity back. She grunted as she collided with the ground, and a jolt of pain coursed through her cracked hoof. She snapped her head up just in time to see a magical glow encase the door, windows, and the surrounding tree. Slowly, the bark of the tree began creeping up on the door and windows, sealing the library shut. Rarity could only scream as she watched the Golden Oak's library slowly revert into nothing more than an ordinary tree. Amidst her screams, Rarity was only barely able to make out the giggling voice of Twilight. "Sorry for that, Smarty Pants. Rarity can be kind of forceful when she wants to hang out. Would you like some more tea?" Rarity began sobbing and dragged herself over to where the door used to be. "Twilight! Twilight! What's happening to you?" "I like this, Smarty Pants. It's just you and me now. It should have always been just you and me. Just you and me. Just you and me." Rarity began pounding on the tree, and was about to let another scream when she heard a guttural voice echo out of the treehouse.
Just you and me.
"Howdy guys, Snogwritts here. I'm quite surprised you actually survived through the whole video. Well, special regards to you, fellow viewer. Alrighty then, aside from that, let's start reviewing this fic. Okay, so here's this. The author presented a grieving tone in this fic, and I believe that really helped on making this fic into its dark genre. It definitely made me feel the atmosphere on how desperate and afraid Twilight was on many of the scenes. The author also presented an unpredictable feel on what's going to happen, and that can work greatly on the reader, unable to identify what's going to happen next, asking questions as they read. The plot is well developed. The story flows through its details and its characters. I definitely felt as the reader how the story was well told, but however, on the other hoof, it wasn't entirely. Although the author did designate this fic to dark and gore, I noticed another genre in this fic, and that is comedy. Specifically, the presenter forms the silliness into the plot, but stays into the dark genre. However, I'm afraid it didn't work well with that in mind. The reason is because there's more incorporated silliness than darkness, which can interfere with the fic's atmosphere. In other words, there was more into the comedy genre than there was to the dark genre. Notably enough, these two are actually almost contradicting categories if you don't use them correctly, or at least in even amounts. My suggestion to the author is to make sure you have more of the genre you're focused on, or at least even amounts of each, so it doesn't interfere with the atmosphere. Remember, one of the writer's goals is to make the reader skeptical about the atmosphere of his or her writing. Now don't get me wrong here, I'm not claiming that you shouldn't include other genres into one story. In fact, that's actually a good idea, but be aware of contradicting categories, because a short story can never have all genres. For instance, if a story is going to have genres of happy and sad, then it should be self-explanatory why it's not going to mix. Dark and comedy are not contradicting categories, but make sure you stick to your focused genre. But regardless, I definitely felt the author did a really good job writing this fic, especially the atmosphere, which I definitely felt myself, and I hope you did too. As always, I definitely enjoy reading this fic to all of you. Alright, let's wrap this video up. So before you write something, remember to ask yourself what genre you'll be focusing on, and trust me when I say this, you'll definitely write a great story afterwards. Alrighty then, as always, thank you for listening, fellow viewer, and if you liked the video, please give this video a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. I upload weekly fanfic reads every Saturday on a variety of genres. Alright, that's it for me. This is Snogwritts, signing out.